Welcome to another explainer from Notebook Summaries. Today, we're taking a look at the really complex and, frankly, often tragic history of Equatorial Guinea. It's a nation with a story that's just full of contradictions. Immense wealth on one hand and just immense suffering on the other.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the colonial powers and ancient peoples, then see how Spanish Guinea was formed. From there, we'll cover independence and the dictatorship that followed, the rise of the Obiang dynasty, and finally, where the nation stands today. Okay, first up, colonial powers, ancient peoples. We're going to rewind the clock, way back before any modern borders existed, to look at who first lived here and what happened when Europeans showed up and changed everything. So long before any European ships appeared on the horizon, this whole region was a real crossroads of different peoples. It's believed the very first inhabitants were pygmies. Then, over a couple of centuries, you have these major Bantu migrations that bring in the Fang and the Bubi peoples. On top of that, Igbo slave traders set up small settlements, and the Portuguese, well, they brought people from Angola all the way to the island of Annamon. So it was already this incredibly diverse melting pot. All right, so the first Europeans show up in the late 1400s. A Portuguese explorer, Fernando Po, discovers the island of Bioko, and boom, Portugal colonizes it and Annamon. But here's the real twist. The game changer comes in 1778 with the Treaty of El Pardo. Portugal basically trades these islands and some mainland rights to Spain. And just like that, the stage is set for centuries of Spanish influence. So now we're forging Spanish Guinea. Let's dig into how this huge claim on a map ended up becoming a pretty tiny colony. You have to understand, after that treaty, Spain had huge ambitions. They laid claim to this massive chunk of the mainland. We're talking 300,000 square kilometers, stretching way, way into the interior. It was a colonial dream on a massive scale. But here's the thing, claiming land on a map and actually controlling it are two very different things. And Spain, well, they kind of just neglected their claim for over 100 years. Meanwhile, the French were busy expanding all around them. So when it finally came time to draw the lines on the map for real in 1900, Spain got a rude awakening. They were left with just a tiny fraction of what they originally claimed, only 26,000 square kilometers. Okay, so now they've got their borders, but the Spanish planters immediately run into a massive problem, a chronic labor shortage. The indigenous Bubi people on Bioko, quite rightly, refused to work on these colonial plantations. And to make a terrible situation even worse, their population was being decimated by diseases and addiction brought by the colonists. This created an absolute crisis for the colony's main industries. So what was their first solution? They started bringing in contract workers from Liberia. But this wasn't some simple work program. It was so brutal, so exploitative, that an international commission investigated and found that the conditions were, and I'm quoting here, scarcely distinguishable from slave raiding and slave trading. Wow, that report was absolutely damning, and it put a stop to that source of labor fast. So they were getting desperate, and this desperation led to a whole new, initially illegal solution. A massive number of workers were smuggled in by canoe from Nigeria. By 1942, you're looking at 20,000 clandestine workers on the island. This whole underground network eventually became so significant that it led to official treaties to keep the labor flowing. All right, on to independence and dictatorship. So, after all that colonial history, the dream of freedom finally becomes a reality. But this dream very, very quickly turns into an absolute nightmare. So on October 12th, 1968, it finally happens. After a lot of pressure from nationalists and the UN, Spain grants independence. And here's the crazy part. The new country actually started out with one of the highest per capita incomes in all of Africa, mainly from cocoa. But, and this is a big but, that wealth was definitely not spread around evenly. The new president, Francisco Macias Nguema, he did not waste any time. By 1970, single-party state. By 1972, he's president for life. Then, he just starts systematically tearing society apart. In 1975, all schools are closed. By 1978, all churches are closed. The country was plunged into this paranoid, isolated reign of terror. And the human cost, it's just staggering. A full one-third of the entire population was either killed or forced to flee into exile during his rule. Think about that. The economy completely cratered. Everything just fell apart. And if you want to understand just how totalitarian this regime was, you just have to look at this quote. "There is no other god than Masias Nugema." This became the official national motto in 1978. They forced people to say this. It just perfectly sums up the absolute terror and the cult of personality he built. Okay, next up, the Obiang dynasty. So, the reign of terror ends, but the new guy in charge is a familiar face, a really familiar face. So, the dictator's nephew, Teodoro Obiang, overthrows his uncle in a coup. And while that chaotic, violent terror of the Masias years is over, it's basically replaced by a more organized authoritarianism. Obiang's rule, which is still going on, has really been shaped by two key things: finding a ton of oil and, sadly, continuing the legacy of severe human rights abuses. So Obiang is now the longest-ruling non-royal leader in the entire world, and his time in power is just a textbook case of the resource curse. In the 90s, they strike oil in a big way, and suddenly the government is flooded with cash. But does it help the people? Not really. It just seems to help the regime hold on to power. This probably made them a target for things like that wild, failed coup attempt in 2004. And yeah, they'll sign an anti-torture decree here and there, but groups like Amnesty International say the abuse just continues, all while the government's busy planning to build a brand new, super lavish capital city. All right, let's bring this story right up to the present day. A nation in 2025. What's been happening with the oil, the elections, all of it? Man, the 2020s have been really eventful so far. You've got this horrible tragedy in 2021 with massive explosions in the city of Bada. Then in 2022, there's another election where Obiang wins with, wait for it, 99.7% of the vote. Yeah, and then you have these big geopolitical moves like reports of Russian Wagner mercenaries showing up and a big win against Gabon in an international court case. Those explosions in Bataille were a true catastrophe. We're talking about a series of huge blasts at a military base, supposedly from dynamite that was just stored improperly. They ripped right through the biggest city in the country. The official toll was 98 dead and over 600 injured. It was a really stark and tragic reminder of the ongoing problems with basic safety and infrastructure there. So that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? Here's a country with immense oil wealth, and they've just won a court case to get even more territory. But given its history, all the pain, all the authoritarian rule, what does the future actually hold for the average person living there? Hey, if you found this history interesting, you should definitely explore more of our quick country histories. We've got a whole playlist. And be sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more explainers like this one. Thanks for watching.